Servus, Speed Freaks, your weekly dose of F1 Brake Check is here. On this week's episode, we are going to relive the events from this weekend's action. We will learn about the history of the Austrian Grand Prix, and we'll talk tow versus dirty air in our tech corner. Corey will try to smoke my brain in our Stump the Pundit segment. We will also get you ready for next weekend's action from Silverstone in the British Grand Prix. So buckle up, grab a pint, and get ready. F1 Brake Check is dropping the hammer.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We are back with F1 Brake Check. I am Scott Vick, one of your hosts. With me, as always, is my brother in arms, my ride or die, my pundit for life, Corey Broom. Corey, how you doing this week, sir?
Good. It's a short week here in the U.S. We have 4th of July, Independence Day is on Thursday, and then my company actually has Friday off as well, so Thursday, Friday is off. Nice 4-day weekend holiday. How about you?
Yep, same here. I've got a 4-day weekend coming up, and then it's a 4-day work week, and then I am off to beautiful Florida for a week. So it's going to be, my brain has already started checking out from work.
Oh, yeah.
Then, well, let's get into our history. From its early beginnings on a mountain roads to its current status as a premier event at the Red Bull Ring, the Austrian Grand Prix has undergone numerous transformations. The roots of the Austrian Grand Prix can be traced back to 1957, when the first race was held at the Zeltweg Airfield, a military airport in the Styria region. This early iteration of the race was part of the Formula 2 series and was run on a makeshift circuit on the airfield's runways. The track featured a very rudimentary layout consisting of only 5 corners and the long runway straightaways. The event drew significant attention, paving the way for the future of the Austrian motorsports. In 1963, the race moved to a newly constructed track at the Zeltweg Airfield, officially entering the Formula One calendar in 1964. This inaugural race was won by Italian driver Lorenzo Bandini, driving for Ferrari. However, the circuit's bumpy surface, created by the concrete of the runways, was deemed unsuitable for the high-speed demands of Formula One, leading to its removal from the calendar after just 1 year. The construction of the Osterring, a purpose-built track located near the town of Spielberg, would be the signal to the world that Austria was ready to take its place on the world motorsport stage. Opened in 1969, the Osterring was known for its fast and flowing nature, with sweeping corners and high-speed straights. The Austrian Grand Prix returned to the Formula One calendar in 1970, and the Osterring quickly earned a reputation as one of the most exciting circuits. Over the next 2 decades, the track hosted numerous memorable races and witnessed the triumphs and tragedies that define motorsport. Niki Lauda, Austria's most famous racing driver, became a national hero with his performance at the Osterring, including his win in 1984. The Osterring's tenure as a Formula One venue ended in 1987 due to safety concerns. The track's high-speed layout, combined with limited runoff areas, was deemed too dangerous for modern Formula One cars. After a decade-long absence, the Austrian Grand Prix returned in 1997 at the refurbished A1 ring, a modernized version of the Osterring. The circuit had been shortened and reprofiled to meet contemporary safety standards, featuring a mix of fast and slow corners that provided new challenges for drivers. The A1 ring brought a new wave of excitement to the Austrian Grand Prix. The 1999 race is particularly memorable for the collision between McLaren teammates Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard, which handed the victory to Eddie Irvine of Ferrari. The 2002 race, however, is often recalled for its controversial team orders from Ferrari when Rubens Barrichello was instructed to allow Michael Schumacher to pass him for the win, which occurred on the very last lap within feet of the finish line, prompting widespread criticism and changes in the rules governing team orders. Despite the excitement on the track, financial difficulties led to the removal of the Austrian Grand Prix from the Formula One calendar after the 2003 race. The Austrian Grand Prix made a triumphant return in 2014 thanks to the efforts of Red Bull founder Dietrich Mateschitz, who purchased and redeveloped the A1 ring into the Red Bull ring. The updated circuit retained much of the character of its predecessor while incorporating modern safety features. With the picturesque Styrian Mountains as a breathtaking backdrop, the modern era of the Austrian Grand Prix has been marked by thrilling races and notable performances. In 2016, the race saw a dramatic last-lap collision between Mercedes teammates Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, resulting in Hamilton taking the victory and intensifying the championship battle and their heated rivalry. The 2019 race, meanwhile, is remembered for the emergence of Max Verstappen. Verstappen's charge through the field to claim victory after a poor start showcased his exceptional talent and solidified his place in F1 history. The COVID-19 pandemic had a significant impact on the 2020 racing calendar, but the Austrian Grand Prix played a crucial part in the sport's return. The Red Bull Ring hosted the opening two races of the revised 2020 season, dubbed the Austrian Grand Prix and the Styrian Grand Prix, providing a doubleheader that set the precedent for the remainder of the season. The Austrian Grand Prix storied history and the continued success of Red Bull Racing, the proverbial home team, will continue to thrill and add new chapters to its already storied legacy. All right, so this week we're going to talk about aerodynamics before in previous tech corners, but this week we're going to take and talk about one of the nuances of racing aerodynamics, and we're going to be taking and talking about the difference between driving in dirty air and getting a tow.
I hear a lot of commentators on F1 during a race, they'll talk about dirty air and then they'll also talk about tow, but it's really confusing if you're not really understanding what the variance is. When is it dirty air and when is it actually a tow? Can you go into both of those? What is a tow? And then also contrast that with what is dirty air?
Absolutely. We'll start with tow. Quick physics 101. With air density, that's the force that the car has to create in order to push through the air. And the faster the car goes, the harder it has to push through the air, especially with the aerodynamics creating drag and things like that. The way that a modern Formula One car is built, though, with the aerodynamics, both from the diffuser, which sends air from underneath the car up over the beam wing on the rear wing and generates downforce, as well as the air that comes off of the sides of the car and off of the rear wing. It basically creates a low pressure area behind the car. And so that low pressure area for a following car, it doesn't have to work as hard to push through the air. And so therefore it's actually able to, especially like on a straightaway or something, it's actually able to accelerate faster. Or if they've reached their top speed, it actually allows the car to go 1 to 2 kilometers per hour faster than the car in front of it, because it's not having to push through that higher density air. And also temperature and everything, of course, has an effect on it as well. So it's like, if the colder it is, the more dense the air is. The warmer it is, the less dense the air is, and the easier it is for the cars to push through.
You'll hear this a lot during qualifying. A teammate will help another teammate by creating that tow. So they'll go a little bit faster.
Yes, that's exactly right. One of the things that takes and really helps with the tow, either from a teammate or from another car, especially when they're coming down the faster straightaways, you'll see one car get a tow and he'll actually stay behind the other car for a little bit of time. And as they start to close up, you'll see the other car kind of move out of the way off of the racing line. When they're doing it with teammates and everything, they're actually able to time it just right so that when the car pulls over, following car can actually slingshot around. Sometimes they can get as much as 8 to 10 kilometers more speed coming down the straightaway. So that's how the tow works. Now, the opposite of it is that when you've got one car that's following another car, because the way that the modern Formula One cars, the way that the air comes off of the diffuser, comes off of the rear wing, comes around the quote unquote water slides talked about a few weeks ago, around the side pods and everything, is it creates a low pressure area right behind the wings. So the car has to be relatively close. When you're going down the highway or the motorway, when you get too close to a car in front of you, you get the benefit of a tow, but because of traffic laws and safety and things like that, you're generally told to stay at least 2 car lengths behind the car in front of you. Well, once you get that far back, then you start to get into the dirty air, because just like a Formula One car, a road car will create a low pressure area directly behind it. But the further you get away from it, the air coming off of the car starts generating vortexes. If you're driving just in a straight line by yourself, you're just pushing through more or less through still air. I mean, wind comes into factor, but more or less you're just running through still air. But when you're following behind another car, the car in front of you is creating all kinds of vortices in the air and instability in the air, the way that it takes and moves around. when you're driving down the highway or the motorway, further you are away, the dirtier the air gets, and especially behind a modern Formula One car. Because if you've ever seen some of the computerized traces of the computational fluid dynamics, or CFD, of some of these cars, you'll see the low pressure area behind the car and where the air is all smooth and everything. And then you start to see within 4 or 5 feet past the end of the car, the air just becomes unbelievably turbulent. Aerodynamic management implements such as the fences, like you saw back in the 90s and everything, what we referred to as the barge boards, which were these giant aerodynamic pieces that were attached to the car behind the rear wheel in front of the side pods. And those were designed to take and manage the air coming through the suspension components on the front wheels and manage it how it went around the side pods and also through the side pods and underneath the floor. Once you get into the dirty air, though, instead of that air coming in nice and more or less, for lack of a better term, straight, coming into that area, now it's all jumbled up and everything, for lack of a better term. Instead of the air being smooth, the air is now all jumbled up and bumpy. When you're going through that, no matter how much you tune those aerodynamic implements to try to smooth that air out, it can't really do its job, because it's like you've got air that's hitting some of those aerodynamic elements instead of flowing around them. They're hitting it so that it will actually take and slow the car down. It takes off air away from the wings and everything so that the cars are not able to generate as much downforce, especially in the corners. That's where the cars are really super sensitive to the dirty air, is as they're going through, especially higher speed corners, they're not able to get the grip. And so the front end of the car will start to quote unquote wash out, meaning that the tires are literally lifting slightly off the ground. So they're not getting as much
traction
grip.
Yeah.
And so the car starts sliding around. You're now going to start getting more wear on the tires. Right. So that's kind of how the whole aerodynamics affected. The difference between being in the tow and being in the dirty air is also on the fuel management for the car, because the less air that the car has to punch through, the better fuel economy that the driver is going to get, as opposed to being in the dirty air where it's actually kind of like pushing back on the car, which causes the driver to take and use more fuel as he's trying to punch through that dirty air. So there's a number of knock-on effects, the difference between being in the tow and being in dirty air.
So how does a aero going to affect this? I know that there's going to be new changes in 2026, but is that going to affect the dirty air as well? Is that going to help or hinder that?
Time will tell. There's a number of differing opinions about how it's going to affect the 2026 cars because of the reduction in size of the Venturi tunnels, which is the part underneath the floor of the car that takes and is used to help what we refer to as ground effects, which takes and helps generate a lot of the downforce on the cars. The size of the tunnels are going to be reduced in 2026. They're also doing away with the beam wing on the rear wing. Last year, when we talked about aerodynamics, we talked about beam wing, which is the wing element that is very low down near the car, that actually most of the teams use as one of the attachment points for the rear wing to the car. And usually the air that comes out of the diffuser goes over the beam wing and generates a lot of that downforce, but it also takes and produces a lot of the turbulence that comes off the back of the car as well. They won't be allowed to use a beam wing in the 2026 regulations. There are some who have said that the air coming off of the diffusers will create a lot more turbulence. And there's others who have said that no, because the way the air comes out of the diffuser is more or less a straight shot and it goes up, that by not having the beam wing there creating turbulence, that it'll actually create a larger dead zone, if you will, or low pressure area behind the cars. With the combination of the increased hybrid power generation for acceleration and things like that, coupled with the lower downforce, I think it's going to create a much better racing than even what we get right now. All right, so we're on to Stump the Pundit. This is my favorite section of every week, where Corey will come at me with a couple of trivia questions and try to melt my brain. So Corey, what do you have for me this week?
I have a few. So looking at the Austria track, it was one of the shortest in all of the 24 races. I think it's the number 3. So looking at that, throughout the history of F1, what has been the longest track and how long was it?
I'm trying to remember in the early days of, because Spa right now is one of the longest tracks at 4+ miles in distance, but in its original incarnation, Spa was tremendously long, but I don't remember how long it was. But even then, I'm still going to go with the Green Hell. So the Nürburgring at 14 point something miles is the longest track that F1 has ever raced on.
Close. It's just a little bit over 16 miles, and it was the Italian street circuit of Priscona.
Really interesting. I don't even remember a lot about that one. So
it was operational from 24 to 61. So it was only in Formula One for 1 year.
Okay.
It has that record.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow. That's incredible.
What is the shortest track?
The shortest track is Monaco at 2 miles, exactly 2 miles.
Yep. What is the shortest F1 race in history?
What was it? Not last season or the season before that. So I guess it would have been the 2021 season at Spa, where the race was called after only a handful of laps behind the pace car. They called the race and basically handed out points based upon everybody's basically qualifying order, because in the monsoon conditions, they couldn't really start the race. And for whatever reason, they decided they didn't want to run it the next day.
Yeah. So just under 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely correct. Yes.
That is incredible.
2 more.
Okay.
Who holds the longest F1 career?
Longest F1 career? I want to say it's Fernando Alonso right now. He surpassed Schumacher here a while back.
Yeah, 23 years and counting.
And counting.
Yes, exactly, and counting. And then it's followed by Schumacher, as you said, and Lewis Hamilton, and counting, obviously. So he's still
and counting.
So we'll see where he ends up. Who has the shortest F1 career? It's not De Vries.
No. There's a number of drivers that have been basically one and done. Right now, they're all escaping me. I want to say Roberto Moreno, but I think he had more than one start. I'm gonna give up on that one.
Okay. Yeah, like I said, there's 4. So Esteban Turo at 1998 Argentine Grand Prix, Marco Apriciola at the 1993 Italian Grand Prix, Marcos Winblot, 2007 European Grand Prix, Emilio Del Vittorio, and they all had 1 Grand Prix. And
one Grand Prix.
There's a few others that had 2, a couple others that had 3, but those are the shortest in F1 history. And that's it for Stump to Pundit.
That was awesome. All right, so let's get into our news, rumors, our review of the Austrian Grand Prix, and our preview of the Silverstone. This weekend, it was another sprint weekend. This was, for all intents and purposes, a home race for Red Bull Racing. So Red Bull Racing, Red Bull Ring, this was a home race for the Red Bull team. Even though they're based in England, this was their home race. We knew that Red Bull was going to come in and they were going to look really, really strong, being their home race. And we weren't wrong in the fact that Max dominated practice, sprint qualifying, the sprint race, and qualifying for the Grand Prix. And then it all went sideways come race time. First of all, before we get into the Grand Prix on Sunday, let's take and talk about that first. Was it any surprise to you, the fact that Max looked just that freaking dominant this weekend compared to the woes from the last couple of weeks?
No, like you said, this was, out of the entire calendar year, this is the one race Red Bull is going to dominate as much as they can. I had no doubt.
With the exception of maybe Zandvoort when they get to the Dutch Grand Prix.
True. You know, well, I'm saying Red Bull as a team.
Yeah, Red Bull as a team. This is the win or die one.
Right. No doubt that Red Bull was going to dominate the entire weekend. Had no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we said, Max dominated all the way up to Sunday, and it looked like even on Sunday, after he got off to a brilliant Max Verstappen start on Sunday, Had a little bit of a challenge from both Oscar and Lando in the first couple of laps. But then after that, he just kind of checked out, and it looked like we were just going to have another dominant performance from Max. And then, surprise, surprise, Lando also had a really, really strong weekend. He was only off by a couple tenths of a second in qualifying for the Grand Prix, qualified second for the sprint, finished in third only because of a small mistake late in the sprint that relegated him to third and allowed his teammate to get past him during the sprint. But then Verstappen has a very uncharacteristic bad pit stop from the Red Bull crew. And because Lando and Verstappen pitted, I mean, basically Lando just followed him straight into the pits on their second stop. And because of the bad stop, it allowed Lando to pull right up on the Verstappen's gearbox, and game on. Lando, as we have talked about on several times over the last couple weeks, that since his first win at Miami, Lando has just been on an absolute tear. And had it not been for one or two little fumbles on Lando's part, he could have very well have also won at Imola, and he also very well could have won last week at Barcelona.
Oh, no doubt about it. That Red Bull pit stop couldn't have happened at a worse time for Max.
No.
Any other time earlier, if they would have done the same thing on the previous pit stop, okay, fine. Max will take up the time. But with that few laps to go to do something that horrible as far as the pit stop time goes, that killed it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So Lando is actually able to close up the gap.
Yep.
They're going down into the hairpin. Lando gets the braking perfect. He couldn't have done a better job. I'm going to voice my opinion on the way the incident went down, and then I want to hear your thoughts on it to see if you agree with me. Lando picked a spot. He executed the braking perfectly, and for all intents and purposes, I really think that Lando had the corner, and he was going to be able to pull off the pass on the outside because Max picked a spot, went to the inside to try to block off Lando to keep him from going on the inside. And so Lando went to the outside, and I think Lando was probably going for what they refer to as the crossover, which means that Lando would have gone around the outside of the corner, but it slowed up a little bit more. Max would have gone across the front of him so that Lando could have slid back behind him and then gotten a better exit with more speed off the corner and would have passed him going into the straight.
Yeah.
Well, Max Verstappen, in a move that we have not seen, that's been very uncharacteristic for Max for the last few years, but this time he pulled out the Max Verstappen circa 2020, 2019, where instead of conceding and giving Lando room, he drifted across the track into the side of Lando. The contact causes Verstappen to also get a puncture in one of his rear tires, and basically it ends Lando's race. Lando actually was coming down the straightaway. Even though his car was damaged and he had a puncture, he's still trying to pass Verstappen, and Verstappen's actually pushing him off into the grass, which, okay, Lando did it the previous week at Barcelona. That's a racing incident. I can see that happening. From the aerial view of the incident, you can definitely see Verstappen slid over, and he pulled one of the biggest faux pas in racing, which is once you pick a spot and you start to brake, you stay in that spot. You do not move under braking. That's considered almost the unforgivable sin, because that's just absolutely dangerous in all respects. It's dangerous for the driver executing it. It's dangerous for any drivers that are around that driver. You never move while you're braking. You stay on your line when you're braking, and you can clearly see that under braking, Max moves over into Lando, or at least that's the way I judged it. Your thoughts?
I've seen, and you even brought it up, we haven't seen this type of racing from Max in a while, but the thing is, we haven't seen anybody challenge Max in a while. That's the issue. It's not that we haven't, that he's matured and he's this new driver. He's not. He's the same driver he's always been. He just hasn't had that person like Hamilton, like now Lando. We didn't have that before. So you're going to see that in him again and again and again, especially as Lando starts to get faster and faster and faster, and McLaren's even maybe even better than Red Bull at times. So I definitely don't see this as going to be an isolated incident. This is probably going to happen probably a few more times to Lando specifically. So we'll see. I like Max a lot. I admire him as a driver. I admire what he's done for the sport, but he's clearly in violation. I know Horner's all over saying no, he was innocent, and nope.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just don't see it that way. And
No.
again, I'm a fan, so I definitely think that this was something that Verstappen could have, if he wanted to, could have avoided it. I think that he would have avoided it if it was earlier in the race. He wouldn't have done it because he would have known, hey, my strategy or my car can make up the time. So I think that he would have done that. But with it being so close, Max wasn't going to give up that spot. And in fact, after they collided, and Lando had less damage, or at least his car was a little bit more drivable. Max wasn't letting him pass. He swerved in and out. He was not letting Lando pass. So that was not going to happen.
No. I'm going to say that Lando could have moved a little more over towards the edge of the track. I'm going to say it was more like maybe a 80-20 split as far as the blame goes. But the 80%, the vast majority of it definitely belongs in Verstappen's court.
A hot button for you, so to speak, is they gave Max for causing an accident and really taking Lando out of the race completely. They gave him 10 seconds. 10 seconds. He didn't even lose a place.
No.
10 seconds is
well, yeah, I mean, he didn't lose a place at the end,
So there's no consequence for him driving like this. Which means that, okay, if there's no consequence for me doing something, then I'll just do it again. Okay, it's illegal, but there's no problem.
All I'm going to do is get penalized 10 seconds, then no big deal. I hate the time penalties. I have kind of modified my viewpoint on that in the first 2/3 of the race, in most cases, when they hand out the penalty and the driver has to serve it on their next pit stop, where they pull into the pit and the mechanics are not allowed to touch the car for 5 or 10 seconds before they can start working on the car. That is a quote unquote a true penalty. That's the equivalent of the drive-through that you and I have talked about that a lot of the other racing series use. Once you get past that point where the normal pit stops have already taken place and you're in that latter part of the race where, unless there's like some kind of dramatic change, like rain or something like that, where they've got to come in for different tires, or there's damage to the car or something, generally the drivers are not going to be stopping again. At that point, giving a time penalty to them while they're out on track is a joke. Right. And I do believe that in this particular case, I think that with 10 laps or less in a situation like this, if you take a car out, you should also be immediately DQ'd. Max was in the wrong here. And because he took Lando out and Lando was not able to finish, Max should have been DQ'd. Let's move on to the next thing. So with the incident between Lando and Max, the resurgent Mercedes of George Russell, who is running a very, very strong third place, sweeps past them and goes on to take the Grand Prix win, which is the first win that Mercedes has had in over 500 and something. I forgot what the exact number was, but it was 500 and something days. So over a year and a half since their last win George's win at Interlagos back in the 2022 season. Applause to the Mercedes. And I mean, a few weeks ago, you and I were discussing of how long are we going to have to make excuses for Mercedes and the fact that they just seem to be going in the wrong direction. Their pace was strong. It wasn't strong enough to challenge Lando or Max, but it was strong enough to be in the right place at the right time that when the incident happened, they were able to sweep in and take a commanding lead of the race and take the victory. So kudos to Mercedes, because also Lewis had a really, really strong race as well, and came home in fourth place. He was just a few seconds off of being on the podium. Mercedes had a really, really good weekend. So your thoughts?
It was amazing first off, just for George. I think that it was fantastic that he was able to do that. And like you said, Mercedes has looked really, really good over the last few races. Looked good in the sprint. They looked good in the Grand Prix. Very happy with their results, and congratulations to them.
And we'll just touch on this just really briefly because I don't want to belabor it. But did you see Toto's remarks that as soon as George passed and went into the lead, Toto immediately came on the thing, said, "George, you can win this. Let's go." And he said, that was the single biggest mistake, dumbest thing I've ever done in my entire career in Formula One.
Yeah. But he was so excited. Like, George, you can do this,
Yes.
It's exactly. Probably more like one of those, it's supposed to be your inner voice and it just comes outside.
Yep, absolutely. We've already talked quite a bit about the McLaren and how strong they looked, but we also have to give kudos to Oscar as well. It was another really, really great weekend for them. Like we said, during the sprint, both Max and Oscar were challenging Verstappen for the win in the sprint. Oscar had ended up finishing second, and he was only 1.9 seconds off of George's finishing time. So it was a very, very close race. All the applause to McLaren because they had really strong weekend. Like we talked about at the top of the news and rumors section here, we talked about this coming weekend at Silverstone. This is the home race for McLaren. And I guarantee you they are going to look really, really strong again. The Silverstone is a track that this is where they really started to come alive last season after all the upgrades, and where they were really challenging the status quo. We're really showing a lot of promise and everything. And I think that they're going to come into Silverstone this week with something to prove. All right, so Ferrari on the flip side, they had, by all accounts, had a mediocre weekend. They didn't have a great qualifying for the sprint. In fact, Charles Leclerc made it into Q3, but wasn't able to actually set a lap time because of issues with the car. In the sprint race itself, they didn't look great. Sainz finishes fifth. Leclerc finishes seventh. But then in the Grand Prix, Sainz, although he rounded out the podium and was actually able to be in the right place at the right time, that he was actually able to pick up what was left on the table after the Verstappen-Norris incident. But poor Charles Leclerc during the race, he gets his front wing clipped on the first lap. Not a great pit stop to replace the front wing. Then the hard tires, just for some reason, I don't know if it was just a bad set or what, but before we were even at halfway point, Charles has already made 3 pit stops. The team told him that, hey, if we play this right from here on out, we could at least come away with some points. Even though the result wasn't there, you got to give a lot of credit to Charles, who managed to go from dead last in the pits with a busted up nose, multiple tire issues, and he claws his way up and comes within 6 seconds of 10th place and getting a point. Something that former Ferrari driver Jean Alesi came out in the press and said that he sees in Fred exactly the same thing that Jean Todt did when he came in and took over Ferrari, and he laid that groundwork. He took a decade of mediocrity and laid the groundwork that saw the dominance of the Michael Schumacher years. And he says that he sees the same thing, that Fred is doing the exact same thing, where he is laying that groundwork. And now with 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton coming into the team next year, that he is doing the exact same thing, where he is laying that groundwork, and he has made such a fundamental culture change at Ferrari that if not for 1 or 2 bits of bad luck, we would be having a totally different conversation. I think it's just a matter of the luck changing just a little bit, and Ferrari's going to be right back there in the thick of things. All right, so we got to talk about our surprise of the weekend, which was Haas. We kind of thought that Haas would kind of have a mediocre weekend and everything, but they came to play this weekend. They looked pretty strong in qualifying. K-Mag takes and out-qualifies his teammate. Hulkenberg didn't have the greatest qualifying for the sprint, but then when it came time for qualifying for the Grand Prix itself, he makes it into Q3 for, I think, that was either the 3rd or 4th time this season that Hulkenberg has made it into Q3 in qualifying, keeps his nose clean and drives an absolutely brilliant race and comes home in 6th place. If other things had gone just slightly different, or he had been just a little bit closer to Max to take advantage of that 10-point penalty that Max was handed, I mean, he could have had a very strong 5th place finish this weekend. And K-Mag comes home in 8th. So it was a double points weekend for Haas. Your thoughts?
Oh, it was fantastic to see. I love K-Mag, as you know, I'm a huge fan of his. I'm really
Mhm.
hoping he gets that seat again next year. I think that Hulkenberg is just such a phenomenal driver anyway. It's just great to see that finally they have a car and really they have a support team behind them, really helping them get up in points finally. They've been so dogged the last 5+ years that finally they have this infrastructure in place and they have a good car and a good team that actually can get them to the points where they need to be.
Yep, absolutely. So that was really great to see. And I really hope that the car looked really, really good this weekend. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this weekend at Silverstone, I think the car will, because it's another track very similar to Austria, where it is a very, very fast circuit. And I think that it's really going to suit the Haas. And I really hope to see them have another really great weekend coming up. The Racing Bulls, they looked okay. Yuki had another really off weekend, which was really surprising. But Ricardo had a decent weekend, got some points this weekend, looked a lot better.
Yeah.
He actually outqualified Yuki in both the sprint and for the Grand Prix. Yep. The jury's still out, though, on whether or not Ricardo's finally starting to make a resurgence or just Yuki's just had a couple bad weekends. So more to come.
Yeah. Same. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because you'll see Danny do really well for a race or a sprint, and then it just goes back down to anywhere from 12th to 18th place. He'll be right there in that pack, and they're too good of a team to be that far down in the pack. They should be higher than that. Yuki's proven that they can be. Hopefully Ricardo's coming back. We'll see. I don't have a whole lot of faith, but I hope to be wrong.
Last couple of items. So we definitely saw a slip from Williams this weekend in the fact that neither one of the cars looked good. Stroll looked better, but still didn't have a lot of pace this weekend. Fernando Alonso didn't have a great sprint, had an even worse Grand Prix, so not sure what was going on there. And we had yet another tangle between the Alpine duo this weekend, although they finished outside of the points for the sprint, and on race day, only Gasly is able to get one very much needed point. So your thoughts on any of those?
It's great to see that they finally have a car that's really starting to make strides, because Alpine's another racing team that should be up in the points. They should be much higher. This last race, I thought they did really, really well. They looked good all the way through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, then. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a British Grand Prix preview to get you ready for this weekend. Nice. So, Corey, first question. Who do you think is going to go well this weekend?
I think Red Bull, obviously McLaren, and I'll put Mercedes in there too. They always do fairly well at Silverstone. It's one of Hamilton's favorite tracks, home race for him. So I definitely see Mercedes doing really, really well. Red Bull, obviously, is once they come back from the nastiness of this week, and then obviously McLaren's right there on everybody's heels.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said back in when we were talking about the Austrian race, that this weekend is the home race for McLaren. Like most of the teams, their factory is located fairly close to Silverstone. As strong as they have looked, and especially with this being a home race for McLaren, plus it being a home race for Norris, they are going to be a force to be reckoned with this weekend. And I think that they're going to have something to prove because after the events of last weekend with the tangle between Norris and Verstappen. Mercedes, even though they're a quote unquote German team, their factory is located in very close proximity to Silverstone. The two British drivers, they're going to look really good. I'm hoping that Ferrari will have a much better go of it this weekend. Your top four I think are going to look much, much stronger this weekend.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Who do you think is going to take a step back, or who do you think is not going to look too hot this weekend?
I would like to say that Assen is going to do well, but man, they have been struggling lately, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pick them as the people that are going to not do so well on this track. I think they're going to continue down that road.
I have a sneaking suspicion that you're right. I think that this is going to be another really difficult weekend for the Aston Martin team. Who's going to be your surprise this weekend?
I've said this a few times in the past, but I really think that Haas is going to be my surprise. They're my dark horse.
Yep, you and me both. I think this is going to be another really surprising, really, really good weekend for Haas. So you and I are right there together of the same mindset. So, all right, who's on your podium this weekend?
So I'll go with Max, Lando, and I'll stick with Russell.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here this weekend, and I am going to say, I'm sure that I'm going to be way wrong, but I am going that just because of everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks and everything, I am going with an all British driver podium. So it'll be Lando number 1,
all right,
Russell number 2, Hamilton number 3.
Nice. Okay.
All right. So you ready to bring this sucker home?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, then. So it's time to say Auf Wiedersehen from Austria and make the jaunt to jolly old England. We'll be back next week to make sense of all the action from the historic Silverstone circuit. We'll have a new history lesson about the British Grand Prix, a new tech corner, more trivia for Stump the Pundit, and lots more. So until next time, he's Corey, I'm Scott, we are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.